In my last video in this series, I delved into the basics of subtractive synthesis using the completely free TAL noisemaker. This time I'm going to be using OBXD from DiscoDSP to explore the world of analog modeling. This is the OBXD interface here, and it's based on the Oberheim OBX, a true icon of late 1970s and early 80s synthesis. The OBX came in a few different iterations over the years, and depending on the model was capable of 4, 6 or 8 voice polyphony. And the list of artists who've used the Oberheim OBX is extensive and includes household names such as Madonna, Queen and Prince. But perhaps its most famous moment is as the intro to Van Halen's Jump, which sounds a bit like this on the OBX. Something like that. The OBXD is aiming to recreate the imperfections and idiosyncrasies of the original analog hardware. So let's jump into the architecture of the plugin section by section, starting with the oscillators. As with the hardware, there are 2 oscillators on the OBXD, each with 4 shapes. Let's start with oscillator 1. I'll just turn down oscillator 2 in the mix section here. So at the top you've got a tune for oscillator 1, which goes in semitones, a pulse width and a tune for oscillator 2. Let's start with oscillator 1 just over here. If both of these switches are deselected, you get a triangle wave. There's a sawtooth. Clicking on that one alone gives you a square wave. And that's your pulse width for that one. Choosing both of these at the same time gives you a ramped pulse wave. Some other controls here, the detune gives you a global detune on both oscillators at once. Xmod, or cross modulation, modulates oscillator 1 according to the parameters of oscillator 2, which is great for chorus like modulating effects on our FM style grittiness. Sync syncs up both oscillator 1 and 2 together, which should give it kind of a more of a narrower tone. So the waveforms there are completely synced up. Engaging the step button changes the tuning of the oscillator up here. You can see in that tooltip actually it's going in semitones now, 18, 17, 16. But with that off, it's just a continuous tune. This brightness amount dial adjusts the brightness of the upper harmonics. Subtle but quite useful, and the pitch envelope amount is how much the pitch envelope is going to be affecting the sound. Useful for kind of making weird percussive or kick drum kind of noises. The mixer section is nice and simple. It's just a simple volume level of oscillator 1, oscillator 2 and a noise. Then next to that we have the filter section. So by default this is set to a minus 12 dB per octave filter, low pass filter. You've got your usual cutoff, resonance, envelope amount. Pressing this 24 dB button changes it to a 24 dB filter. Key button is keyboard tracking, so that changes how that's going to affect the filter as you play up and down the keyboard. HQ switches into a higher quality mode for the filter, which will take a little bit of a hit on your CPU power, although not too much on my machine. Multi is changing the filter in a sweeping way, so it goes from standard low pass filter on the far left, moving in towards a notch filter in the middle, and then morphing to a high pass filter on the far right. Although if you hit this BP bandpass button, it's going to change the middle one to a bandpass filter instead. On the right of the plugin here, we've got 2 envelopes. So you've got a filter envelope and an amplifier envelope. Very standard stuff, attack, decay, sustain and release for both of those. Very standard synthesizer stuff at the moment, but you can definitely hear the quality of those oscillators and the physical modeling there. Next, we'll have a look at this control section. So this is kind of global controls for how the synthesizer is behaving. This bend octave and bend osc2 are to do with pitch bend. So by default, the pitch bend wheel is going to move the sound by a whole step. So that's me doing the pitch bend wheel up and down to maximum. If you change it to bend octave, it's going to do a whole octave. So depending on how and what you're playing, you might want to use that. Bend Osc 2 is going to apply the pitch bend only to oscillator 2, which gives you some quite weird effects. Fun stuff to mess around with there. You can take the octave off it. Vibrato rate is the vibrato that's applied when you use the mod wheel. So I can move that right up to 10 Hertz or down. Again, that just depends what you're playing, what sort of sound you're using, how you want the keyboard to behave. Filter envelope velocity is how much influence your note velocity as you play it has on the filter envelope. And then amp envelope velocity is how loud the noise is when you change the velocity you're playing on the keyboard. So at the moment that is off. So no matter how hard I'm hitting that key, it's sounding at the same volume. But I can turn that right up to make it much more responsive. Just crank it to the top. Moving across to the modulation section, this is where you can start getting really creative with some strange sounds. So it allows you to assign the LFO modulation to oscillator 1, oscillator 2, the filter, and all the pulse width. So use these knobs here and these buttons to select what LFO you want to be using and where that's assigned. So it has three shapes, a sine, a square, and a random, which you can use individually or combined together. And then over here is where you're choosing what these are assigned to. So the knobs, you've got the LFO rate, the speed of the LFO, the frequency amount, which is kind of the amount of the LFO, and then there's a pulse width amount. It's a bit confusing the way this is laid out, but these buttons, the pulse width here, and then these buttons underneath specifically relate to this pulse width. And then these other buttons labeled OS1 and OS2 is basically your assignment. In the bottom right of the plugin, there's the voice variation section. Now this plugin is using 8 different voices, and you can see there's V1 pan, V2 pan. These can all be panned in completely different directions. So you can get pretty extreme with it and have voices really spread out. So as you're playing it, they're either bouncing around, or if you're playing a big chord, if you're listening on headphones or decent speakers, you'll hear that's really spread out and stereo right across the field. These 3 dials above were not on the original synthesizer. This is just a software thing. So it's filter slope, glide slope, and envelope slope. And this is basically to do with how velocity is affecting the different parts of the synthesizer. So how hard you're playing is affecting the filter, how hard you're playing is affecting the portamento detune amount, and how much the velocity is influencing the amplifier envelope depth. Jumping back over to the left side, there's a master section, just a master volume, a master fine tune, and a master coarse tune in semitones. Under the global section, we have spread, which spreads the tuning variation, which is kind of an additional detune control. Engaging unison stacks all the available voices into one note. So spread and panning are ineffective when unison is active. Glide is also known as portamento, so you can ramp that up to get sliding notes. This voices readout here can be set from anything from 1 to 32, so going beyond the original hardware there. And then you have your menu down here. You can change how it looks. You can load on presets and things like that. Change tooltips. And learn and clear are to do with MIDI assignments. Legato mode and VAM down here are a bit too in-depth to go into here. Worth reading up about, but I don't want to make this video too long. Our article on Music Radar has all the information on that, or just check the manual. So we've gone over the main controller there. I'm just going to go load into a few presets and have some fun with it. Have a little bit of playing around so you can hear what it can do, but I definitely recommend downloading this and trying it out. It creates some fantastic sounds for what is basically a freeware synth. They do recommend that if you are using it and releasing commercial things with it and love it, there is an option to buy it, which I would recommend because it's a fantastic piece of kit. But if you're just using it for your personal use, just learning how to synthesize and things like that, it is completely free. So get onto their website and download it. But for now, let's hear a few sounds.